Welcome to Everyday Buddhism, making every day better by applying the proven tools found in Buddhist concepts. Welcome to episode 61 of Everyday Buddhism, making every day better. And I have a special guest episode today. In this episode, I talk with Scott Snibbe, the creator and host of the podcast, A Skeptic's Path to Enlightenment. Scott is a pioneering interactive artist and augmented reality entrepreneur and the host of the meditation podcast, A Skeptic's Path to Enlightenment. He is a 20-year student of Tibetan Buddhism, whose teachers include Geshe Nagwan Dakpa, Choden Rinpoche, Venerable Rene Fwezi, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Gyomed Khenser Rinpoche Lapsang Jampa, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Inspired by his teachers, he leads meditations that infuse the pure lineage of the great Buddhist masters with science, humor, and the realities of the modern world. Over the course of a career as a digital artist and entrepreneur, Snibbe has created best-selling art, music, and social apps, and collaborated with musicians and filmmakers, including Bjork, James Cameron, and Philip Glass. His interactive exhibits have been collected by both science and art museums, including the Whitney Museum of American Art and New York's Museum of Modern Art. Listen in as two podcasters and longtime Buddhist practitioners explore our mutual confidence in the path of Dharma and how we view how Buddhism fits in today's world, and how we both agree that it can truly make all beings happier. I discovered Scott's podcast and immediately invited him for a conversation, and we decided that we could talk together for days, probably, but trying to keep it within the realm of a normal size podcast. I invited him for a conversation, and that conversation with Scott starts now. Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining us on the Everyday Buddhism podcast. It's fun for me to have you on this podcast episode because, number one, I just discovered your podcast, or I guess I just discovered you, although you've been existing for a while. I discovered your podcast when I was looking around for another podcast, like I need another one to listen to, like a hole in the head. But I was scrolling through my app and always looking at Buddhism and related subjects and spirituality and philosophy and psychology, and boom, it popped up. And I had never seen it before, yet you've been around since the early last year. So it was, I was like, whoa, a new podcast. By the way, I said it at the intro, but it's A Skeptic's Path to Enlightenment. And I immediately reached out to you and said, would you like to be a guest? And we hooked up for a little pre-conversation last week. And I think both of us felt like we could talk each other's ears off. And so that's what we're going to do here today, at least for a while, within the confines of a podcast episode format. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here and really appreciate the invitation and your wonderful podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. Just as a way to kick it off is Scott's podcast is very interesting. I hope you will all go add it to your subscribe list after we're done here, but he covers everything from mindfulness and meditation and to compassion and emptiness and bodhicitta and on to artificial intelligence and Bitcoin. And I mean, it's a, I guess you could call it a far-reaching podcast, but and he also has some really excellent guests. He's his ability to grab big names is exciting, and it'll be enjoyable to everybody. So that's in a nutshell kind of what I want to say about your podcast. But I want you to say, why did you start this podcast? We'll go into, I think I'm going to break it down word by word, like skeptic path, enlightenment. I think that might be fun to try that as a format. But just from a personal level, why did you start this podcast?
So I've been a practicing Tibetan Buddhist for 20 something years. And I got invited to start teaching meditation about 14 years ago. And in teaching those sessions, we go through a series of meditations that are called the Lam Rim in Tibetan Buddhism, which is a specific order of the Buddhist topics that is supposed to be very effective in training your mind and bringing out all of your best qualities. And so I would lead these classes, and I tend to naturally gravitate to certain topics that were kind of better for beginners or people that didn't believe in any of the I guess the super normal or some people might say supernatural aspects of Buddhism. Like I was meditating on love and compassion a lot, and I got scolded actually by my friend who was the leading the center, and she said, "No, you have to do all the topics." I said, "Okay, we'll start doing all the different topics, which break down into there's different ways of numbering them, maybe 12 to 14 topics." And so then when I started trying to be more authentic to this sequence for beginners, I found there were some really big barriers, because even though we were saying this class was open to everybody, open to beginners, no belief necessary, sometimes in the very first class, the way you teach it traditionally, you'd get this triple whammy of belief, of believing in past and future lives, believing in karma, and believing in other realms. So for example, the first topic in the sequence is the precious human life or rebirth. And so often in the first sentence you say, "Oh, for beginningless lifetimes, I've been reborn in awful places and realms. I've mostly been a turtle and a ghost and many other and worse. And finally, I have this, due to the power of this invisible force called karma, I have this lucky rebirth where I have these great mental faculties and a great chance to practice the Dharma. So I better take advantage of that." So that I found was a little alienating for your average person. There were three big things that we can't validate with science today. And so over time, I started to make more and more notes of how you could adapt the Lam Rim to a completely secular form. It seemed to me there was not that much you'd have to change or bear off from in order to get the huge benefit of the meditation, because the type of meditation you do in the Lam Rim is substantially analytical meditation. So it's a meditation where you fill your mind with thoughts and feelings and emotions. And I found that type of meditation, analytical meditation, was really, really good for at least the kind of people who had come into a city center, in America, like highly educated, analytical, intelligent. So with a little bit of tweaks so that people didn't hit this red line of belief, something they couldn't validate scientifically, I felt like you could make all of the topics beneficial. And so I worked on this for about 7 years, just taking notes. I talked to my teachers. This isn't just my idea. His Holiness the Dalai Lama wrote the book Beyond Religion, which encourages us to do this, and my teachers were encouraging. And so 2 years ago, I finally found the time and the motivation, all the conditions came together to launch this idea as a podcast. And so we did an introduction, in Tibetan Buddhism, everything is very long. So our introduction, I think, was 35 episodes or something like that, which introduces people to this sequence.
Yeah, that's that was one of the things that struck me personally, because I, as most of my podcast listeners know from my previous references, is I was a long-term Tibetan practitioner too, 20 plus years myself. And even though I became a lay minister and a sensei in another tradition, in a Mahayana Japanese Mahayana tradition, Tibetan Buddhism is still I would call it my home ground, right? It's where I go. It feels very comfortable return there. I think that's when I need to figure something out for myself, I always pull out one of my Tibetan texts, to do that. So, but what I was struck by was the fact that you were using the Lam Rim, which is a concept that I have found that outside of um, a few schools of Tibetan Buddhism, mostly Gelug, the Lam Rim is not anything anybody even knows about. It's there, or they've never really even heard much about it. And it's and to me, it was always the most logical. And you're right. The way in which a logical way in which would appeal to an average Western or American audience. And the other thing that I was struck by was your focus on analytical meditation, which is also primarily found, I think, in the Gelug tradition. I could be wrong. And that analytical meditation, when I've brought it up to my Sangha, they're like, what's that? What are you talking about? Analytical meditation. And yet it is, I think, the most easy and comfortable way to present meditation to, again, a Western or American audience who analysis, that's kind of it for our minds. The way we were brought up is like, it's kind of what makes people skeptics too, but we'll go there later. But so that's what struck me, and I think you do that beautifully in your podcast. And did you, I know you were asked to teach meditation, but then you created the podcast, and I know the name is Skeptics, but was that really your focus? Like that, was that what, like this is really what you wanted to do? I mean, why skeptics, right? And why not for rationalists, or what I'm saying? What was the concept behind that?
Well, first of all, if you're a real true believer of, in Buddhism and some of the, like you say, the supernatural or supernormal elements of Buddhism, then there are much better teachers than me, I think, to learn Buddhism from. You can go watch the Dalai Lama, a few times a week now, and many other extremely great teachers. So I didn't think there's a huge benefit for like a kind of mediocre Tibetan Buddhist teacher in the world. But I actually do think I'm a pretty great sort of everyday teacher. Not even really a teacher, but more of like a teaching assistant, like the person who took the class, the semester before, and now can help other people along. But the reason I use the word skeptics is that those are the people, they're like my friends. I'm surrounded by these people. Besides my, Sangha members in Tibetan Buddhism, if I look at my friends, my colleagues, the people I encounter everyday life, with my wife and family members, I've gone through life with these people, and some of them for 20, 25 years. And they kept asking me, first of all, there's people who are sincerely looking for ways to live a meaningful, happy life.
Right.
Bottom line. And then they see my example, and sometimes they say, oh, you're into Buddhism. For a lot of people, I'm the only spiritual person they know. A lot of my friends have asked me to, marry them and things like that. So not get married to them, but
I hear you.
To officiate in their marriage.
Yes, right.
So a lot of this I just did for my friends and people like them, because I felt like people have a very rational point of view that why should I believe anything beyond what science tells me? When I look at people who believe things beyond science, beyond rationality, there's a lot of awful examples, including, smashing a plane into the World Trade Center because you believe you're going to be reborn in a heaven with a bunch of virgins.
Right.
So
right.
I think people are totally reasonable in drawing that line really hard and saying, science would say, of course, we don't even know most of reality. But to draw that line at what we currently understand about reality, and try from science and psychological perspective, and then pull in the wisdom of Buddhism, but grounded in, without having to take the recourse of believing something we can't substantiate right now. And I say this as someone, without saying what I personally believe in, which we may or may not get to. That's actually not important, but it's more for the benefit of people who really can't believe anything beyond what they've rationally learned from science, from psychology, and from textbooks, and so on. So that's the point of skeptics. So it's not. So there's a couple of different. There's also cynics, right?
Yes,
A cynic
right.
is a person who actually just rejects things without even thinking about them or considering them. So that's not the audience. It's not a cynic's path to enlightenment, right?
It sounds like a mutually exclusive concept.
Yeah,
Yes,
but a rational skeptic. There's a
right,
concept
right.
of a rational skeptic who is someone who is curious. I think curiosity is really important, but also applies their like critical wisdom and insight. And that's what's so neat about the origins of this path and the intersection. Because if you look at the origins of the Mahayana Buddhism in this particular tradition that goes back to like Nagarjuna and the Nalanda, especially the Nalanda monastery in India.
Right.
In as you look at all the different strands of Buddhism, which I'm not an expert in, but this particular one, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, is extremely analytical and critical, and invites you to take the Buddha's advice to not believe anything on faith alone, but to really test it and analyze it yourself, including using all the modern methods and new information that comes to light. That is the grounding of Tibetan Buddhism, is in that Nalanda tradition of critical inquiry, even debate, right? Debate is greatly encouraged in this tradition. So I thought it was a nice mixture, that Nalanda tradition that I learned through Tibetan Buddhism with modern rational skepticism.
It is, absolutely. And it is, that's just as a offside comment, is that was where I practiced too, in that tradition.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's where I studied. I also practiced in the Drikung Kagyu tradition, but I studied the most in the Kagyu tradition. So,
yeah. In terms of the precision of the text, right? If you want to go and get, very precise textual information and the study of the scriptures and the analysis of the scriptures, it's such an incredible fount of wisdom.
Yes, that it is. That tradition has the depth, and you could go forever if you had the time and the span of life and all of that. I just want to make an offside comment to all those skeptics out there. You mentioned Nagarjuna, and as we know, Nagarjuna, his name comes from how he received the wisdom of his teachings, which was accordingly from dragons. So if if we could lose a few skeptics right there, but I like to point these things out for just for like a random interest. You don't have to. Nagarjuna's writings, and I study them a lot. Are there couldn't be a skeptic in the world who could poo-poo the logic behind Nagarjuna's writings. So whether he got them from dragons or not is another story.
Yeah, I heard Robert Thurman recently say, perhaps the greatest philosopher that ever lived, is Nagarjuna, like the precision of his writing on the nature of reality. So.
Absolutely. I agree. Did you? I'll speak for myself. I started as a somewhat of a skeptic, and you talked about your friends and family members as skeptics, but did you start as a skeptic as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So my brother became a Tibetan Buddhist before me, and he's a skate punk, a photojournalist, all these like really kind of active, aggressive activities. And I was pretty nervous when he became a Buddhist, because I thought, I have no idea where I got this idea, and maybe other people have this misconception too, but I thought that becoming a Buddhist basically meant losing your personality, that you kind of give up yourself. I think that's all I knew about it, is you give up yourself. And I thought, if you give up yourself, what's left? You'll be so boring. So I was kind of worried my brother was going to become really boring. But I watched him for 4 years, and he didn't become boring. He had all the same humor and creativity, but he was kinder and gentler and open. And he's a very deep practitioner. So yeah, that's how I got into Buddhism. Was he he kept sending me books for 4 years, including by His Holiness. And I'll tell you something, I did not understand them. I really found
I get you.
Buddhism very hard to understand. His Dalai Lama's books, I mean, and it is hard to understand, honestly, I think. But finally, when he sent me some Thich Nhat Hanh books and I read, the Dalai Lama's autobiography, it started to make a little bit of sense, but I remember reading Thich Nhat Hanh and then being curious about meditation, try to sit on my bed, and nothing happens. You need a really excellent instructor to learn meditation. But here's what happened is that I invited my brother to go see the Dalai Lama in Los Angeles. I saw the Dalai Lama was coming. So I said, and I love my brother, we're good friends. So I said, I'll take you. I'll buy your ticket. I'll buy your plane ticket. We'll spend 5 days together. I'm patient. I was a lot more patient then than I am now, actually. I said, I'm patient. I can sit through anything. I'll sit through these 5 days of teachings. And at worst, we'll have a great time hanging out in LA together. But what happened was, and I was the skeptic going there, what happened was the minute I saw the Dalai Lama, I just wanted what he was having. I saw his qualities. I'd read his biography. I knew he essentially went through a Holocaust. Like, I come from a Jewish background also, and I have my relatives died in the Holocaust and concentration camps. But, a portion of the reaction of that culture was to get, militarized and aggressive. And that yet the Tibetans went through the same thing, had the opposite approach of being so gentle. The Dalai Lama is like, even if we harm one Chinese soldier, then it makes, 100 other enemies. So, the most logical approach is to be kind and patient, even through like extreme aggression and murder even. So that blew my mind. And I just thought, I want those qualities. And I did not believe in rebirth. I did not believe in past and future lives, karma, any of that. But I felt like these paths are rare. I searched around in life, and it seemed like this would work. It worked on the Dalai Lama. I saw how it was working on my brother and other people. And I just committed to studying it, even though I couldn't accept or even understand most of it. I just committed to studying it. And I studied pretty deeply for a long time with, great teachers, Tibetan teachers and Western teachers.
That's a great story. And I talk a lot with, on my podcast and with my Sangha, talking about, people get hung up on the word faith, that the word faith is used in Buddhism as well. And then, and people like, people come, I think a lot of people come, in my experience from teaching at the center I taught at like years ago, and now virtually, a lot of people come to Buddhism deeply spiritually wounded by another tradition. And then if there's any like baggage that kind of comes through with words like faith and then they sort of like run screaming. And the interesting thing that I always say, and your story just exemplified completely, is to take up Buddhism or any path of you could call it a path of self-development, but I don't really like to think of Buddhism as just self-development. I find it's kind of cheapens it a little bit in my mind. It's just the way I look at it. Anyway, it's somebody that is somebody that exemplifies something to you that you would like to have. It's like there's this text in the three Pure Land Sutras, in the larger sutra, and there's this little part of the text. It's called the Sembutsuge or the Tembutsuge in Japanese, and it talks about how when this guy, this follower, this student, saw the Buddha, he said his face was brighter than the sun, and lit the room, and brighter than the sun, and he immediately vowed that he had to have that. Okay, so I think the parallel is obvious from your story, but that's the kind of thing that I think happens is Buddhism to take up the path of Buddhism. You can call it faith if you want, but you have to have a certain level of confidence based on a respect or an admiration of someone else you admire. And then you say, well, like you said, I want what they have. I had a very similar experience. I started studying Buddhism in the Gelug tradition. I was a book stand Buddhist for many years, even into my high school. I had Ram Dass and Suzuki, and I had everybody on my nightstand. But it was just it was just fascinating. I was also studying Hinduism and Krishna and anything to get me out of my late teen, early 20 angst, and nothing seemed to click. But then I went to see the Dalai Lama's monks. We have Ithaca is here. Namgal is right around the corner from us. So there was they did the Kala Chakra at the art museum, and there's something happened to me, which is why I have the Kala Chakra hanging behind me. Is something clicked. Something happened, and it wasn't even a person necessarily, although there were monks doing the sand. But there something clicked and made a connection to me, and then I started pursuing it more deeply and deeply and deeply, and that's how I connected. But that was when I started meeting all these people whose faces shone like the sun, right? And then that was it. And you can call it confidence, and I think a lot of us, like in like any kind of sport, a high school sport, you may have a basketball coach, and he means the world to you, and you want to be like him, and therefore that's confidence, or it's faith, if you want to say such a thing. So there's a lot of ways, like you said, to translate more esoteric supernatural concepts to what we feel and experience and deal with every day.
Yeah, your point about faith is very good. And sometimes they say devotion. I really like the term respect. I think it's a very, very good term, and it's something I think we think less and less. Our culture has obviously gotten very, very divisive, and it's so much about criticism. Like everybody deserves your criticism. And that's how the news media works too, which is, and plays a very important function. But sometimes we miss out on what's really important also, is to look at people's good qualities. And when you meet someone with so many good quality, like I think for most of us, our friends and the people we admire have more good qualities than bad, at least as we see them. And that's what's amazing when you meet a great teacher. So I'm lucky to have, I list them out every morning in my mind, 17 more teachers. But Venerable Sangye Kadro or Kathleen McDonald, for example, is one of my teachers. And when you meet a person like that, there's just an incredible sense of presence and groundedness and love and attention too. That's one of the greatest aspects of these great Buddhist teachers, is they give you 100% attention. Who in your life ever gives you 100% attention? Sometimes if you're making love or something like that. But even then, sometimes people are distracted. But it's really nice when when you're watching Netflix, unfortunately that's kind of it, right? You get 100% of your attention to Netflix, sometimes to podcasts, which is good. But when a person gives you 100% of your attention, someone once said that's the greatest gift someone can give you, is their attention. And in some ways that's what the teacher does. But I do think you do need that example, but it doesn't have to be that extreme. It can even Dan Harris is a good example, where he's always very self-deprecating, and he's like, this can make you less of a a-hole, he calls it. Right. He swears all the time. But and then people are very, very inspired by him and the effect that meditation has had on his life. So I think we all need some kind of example, but it can be as simple as a friend who's benefited. It is amazing when you find a really authentic teacher, though, but it's not easy.
No, it's not easy, and it's not the way life is going now. It's not the way life will go. I don't think. I think we're getting more and more removed from that ability to find a teacher. People like you who live on the West Coast. I don't know where exactly you live.
Yeah, in Berkeley. There's a
In
lot of
Berkeley.
teachers here.
Yeah.
This
Well,
is
so
ground
yeah,
zero. Yeah.
yeah, but most of the people that I know that I'm talking to live nowhere near number one, a Dharma center. So
Yeah,
therefore, and if they do, they're less likely to have like, it might be more like a community meditation center or something, and
sure,
less
sure.
likely to meet. So, which was one of my reasons for starting my podcast, was that sort of thing, that sort of missing out kind of thing, on just a having a, like you say, you don't consider yourself a teacher, or even a teacher's assistant. That's what the word, we were inducted as senseis in our tradition, and
Mhm.
sensei means gone before, the one who's gone before. So, and I consider myself a spiritual friend. It's just, hey,
Yeah,
this worked for me. Why don't you try it out? See
yeah,
what happens, or something
yeah.
like that.
And also to normalize the discussion, like it shouldn't be so high of a bar to be able to talk to your friends about Buddhism. One of my dreams, because I find this stuff so fascinating and
Me
so
too.
exciting. I mean, it's like as exciting, like more exciting than the movies get quite repetitive. You kind of after a while, like it's very much more exciting than anything. And so I always said, I'd like meditation to be something you get together with your friends and do on a Friday night. Like it's that
Yeah.
interesting and that's fun. And I think it can be, but it does need some modernizing and bringing up modern metaphors. My teacher, Geshe Nawang Dakpa, is my like kind of root Tibetan teacher here,
Mhm.
that I learned so much on the kind of scholarly level from. But he once he once gave a teaching on attachment, which is like craving, desire. And he said, this feeling when you have a lot of attachment, and then he's thinking of an example. He says, like when you see a huge hunk of butter.
And that's what I love
And
about Tibetan
yeah,
teachers. Yeah.
and I was thinking like, oh, when you see an attractive woman or whatever, this thing you want,
Huge
a
hunk of
Tesla,
butter.
an
Yeah.
iPhone. So that was actually one of the moments when I think the spark for this came, because and I learned everything from Geshe. Like it was incredible, but I felt like I did need to translate in my mind. That wasn't the thing that just made me completely lose control, was a pound of butter.
Well, to each his own, but it's a
Yeah,
wonderful example. I
yeah,
mean, I totally get it from a Tibetan point of view. Butter
yeah.
is like a central thing for them
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Tibet. I mean, they put butter in everything, so much so that bleh. But but in our culture, whatever it is, man, a bag of cheese doodles or something. I don't even
yeah.
know what it was, but yeah, this is really good. This is I didn't ask you if this is a question you would disallow, but I'm going to give it a shot. You see, okay, all these years of practice and study, and this is a personal question, and I'll do my part to answer my end of it too, just so I don't leave you hanging out there. Um, is there anything you're still skeptical about?
That's a really good question. Okay, there's actually a really big one that I've really recently started to think about. I mean, I don't want to get too much into my own belief, although we
I
can, we
agree.
could we could talk about kind of how I think about karma and something. But there is one that really fascinates me lately, and it's the idea that when you attain enlightenment, that you kind of know everything. That like there's an idea we learn, at least in our tradition, when we learn about enlightenment, it's a state where you are omniscient. Like you can be in everyone's head at once. You can
Right.
perceive other people's feelings and emotions. You can be present to all phenomena in the universe.
But not
That
omnipotent, omniscient,
not
but not
omnipotent though.
omnipotent.
Yeah, you
Yes.
don't have the power to do anything, but you have
Right.
like the infinite knowledge and awareness and perception. So that one actually I've come to be very skeptical about, but actually in even a more extreme way. That there's this book I read called The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch, he's not religious at all. He's a physicist, a genius. But in the book, he talks about infinity and the ideas of infinity from a scientific perspective. And his thesis is that there's no limit to knowledge, that knowledge itself is infinite, and that science is just replacing wrong theories with less wrong theories.
Right.
But there is never the right theory, that it's infinitely that way. And I have to say, I'm very, very attracted to this idea that maybe there is no complete attainment of completely knowing everything forever, but that there's always growth, that there's always something more to learn or experience. That to me is, and I actually really want to have this conversation with people much more knowledgeable than myself, like Robert Thurman and so on. I'd like to, because it's something I've recently formulated after reading those books. That's probably the thing that I think about a lot day to day lately, is just the idea, because it seems a little bit too much like, heaven or something, the way we talk about enlightenment. I mean, it sounds awesome if really you become completely, ever present. And as the Dalai Lama says, you don't lose your personality or anything. Everybody, right. It's not like you just merge with some universal consciousness, but he says everyone becomes enlightened in their own unique way, which I think is very encouraging. I think it's a little bit scary. A lot of people, if you really look, I think you ask yourself, do I want enlightenment or something like enlightenment? A lot of people say no, like that sounds really weird. Like, I don't want to be happy all the time. Like it's fun to have these ups and downs. Like, how could I have ups without downs? So I think that idea that maybe there's something even beyond enlightenment, that the thing we call enlightenment may even just be one step, that there may even be further steps beyond that.
Yeah, I wouldn't really call that skeptical, but I would call that more curious, which is really one, I think, a really big point on the path of the study of Buddhism. Curiosity, I know, drives me, and I know it drives a lot of other practitioners. It drives you in your meditation practice. It drives you in your scholarly practice, and it drives you everywhere. So I'm going to cut you some slack on that. I don't think that's skeptical. But now we got to my next question is about, so you kind of answered it, but kind of not completely, because for somebody, I think we could expand the definition. What the heck is enlightenment?
Yeah. And I mean, obviously I don't have a direct experience, but I mean, I can tell you from the way I've been taught, and also some ways of kind of normalizing it for skeptics. The way I like to think about it or explain it for ordinary non-Buddhist people is there's a beautiful, beautiful underpinning of Buddhism, because so many people are a little bit nervous about Buddhism because it seems like we talk about suffering and death so much and think about suffering and death so much.
The bad news of Buddhism is what I call it. The bad news of Buddhism.
Yeah.
Right.
And we do. And it's weird, right? Because why are these Buddhists so happy if they're thinking about suffering and death all the time? But we're missing out on one of the key aspects of Buddhism, is that we have this conviction in the fundamental goodness of our mind.
Right.
That at the root of our mind, the deepest aspect of our mind is loving, compassionate, knowing, focused, generous, patient, kind, all of those things. That's our natural state. And I think it's so funny how they call it Buddha nature. Right. I think that's probably why it's talked about less, because Buddha nature seems like a very religious term. But the idea of the natural goodness of your mind, to just use an everyday phrase, I think that's an extremely powerful idea. And that's like the good news. It's sort of like the opposite of original sin, right? Is this idea of original,
the opposite, right?
Yeah,
right.
It's the original. So it's so different. It's actually really good to see how different Buddhism is actually from other religions, and also particular secular points of view. So this is one of the places Buddhism is so different from other religions, and also from the secular perspective and the psychological perspective. The psychological perspective is the best we can have is kind of a mixture of bad and good experience qualities. And, that's that. Buddhism says your mind is innately kind, pure, generous, wise. And it's so encouraging, because the delusions, the aspects of our mind that harm us, that aren't beneficial, like craving, addiction, anger, resentment, those things, even though they seem to dominate our mind, sometimes if you really look at their mind, they say, you'll see that it's actually on the surface. It may be like a really thick crust on the surface that kind of obscures that goodness, like the crust on a planet or something, but still it's there. And that's the beauty of meditation, is with meditation, especially with deep meditation, you can lose those things, and you just see it's there all the time. It's actually there for you to access at any time you want. If you actually just sit down and go there, you can find that part of yourself. And of course, you pop out of it when you pop out of meditation. Like, that's the difference between being enlightenment and not enlightenment. But anyway, this is a kind of a long answer to what is enlightenment, but that's the seed of enlightenment, is the idea that your fundamental nature is good, and also that the mind is changeable. And so through meditation, through study, reflection, and then especially meditation, gradually you can just let go of those disturbing qualities. And they say just your good qualities just naturally shine through. So the idea of enlightenment is that those good qualities are perfectible. That it's actually possible to become always kind, compassionate, loving, wise, generous, patient, feel connected to others, make your life meaningful, and find joy in everyday experience. But full stop, without ever dipping out of it. That's enlightenment from, I think, a more kind of colloquial perspective. And then there are these like super normal aspects to enlightenment they talk about, but I don't think that's necessary. It's enough to say that you could be happy, kind, wise all the time, without saying you could read everyone's mind and like go someplace just by thinking about it. Not sure those other parts are very important to the modern mind.
No, and just like you said, it's enough to think that our obscurations are gone. We don't have these clashes or these poisons anymore, or we're not hanging on to them. I've also been taught that they're always there, and even if someone is enlightened, they can be aware of them, but they're not living in them. And that's sort of the nature of how I was taught. But the interesting thing, I think, is, like you said, we don't have to go to the supernatural places to understand what enlightenment may be. We can get, I believe we can, and this is just my belief, and all ignorance is mine here, is we get glimpses of enlightenment. Like you say, when you meditate, you can get glimpses of how that might feel by being in that state where you're in touch with your pure mind. Because I don't think it's impossible to be in touch with your pure mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You are aware of it in meditation. But the one thing that I find that a lot of people, talking to people, that they get a little, I'm going to use the word irritated about, this sounds all so wonderful and warm and happy, and you just sit down and meditate, and you're going to get a glimpse of the nature of the pure nature of your mind, and blah, blah, blah. And, it doesn't come without a little work. And, this is going to lead me to another sort of long question for you to think about.
Well, before that, though, I wouldn't mind following up on what you're saying, though, because that one more thing about enlightenment, because I've heard His Holiness the Dalai Lama say this, and is the power of ideals, right? Because you can look at enlightenment as an ideal, right? Then enlightenment is the ideal that you could perfect yourself. So, because I heard people ask the Dalai Lama the same question sometimes, and he compared it to world peace. He said,
yes,
well,
yes.
will you have many of you, in fact, maybe almost everyone in this hall today, would believe in the ideal of world peace. But do any of you really think it's possible to achieve world peace? Raise your hand if it's possible. Nobody, right? So why do you believe in that? And he says, the reason you believe in an ideal like world peace is because if you have that ideal as a driving principle of your life, then you are going to get as far as possible as you can towards that ideal, even if the end of the line isn't possible to reach. Whereas if you have a much smaller goal for your life, you won't get as far. So that is one reason to to have the idea, even if you don't necessarily believe in enlightenment, just the believing in the ideal of enlightenment, like pointing your life at like a vector towards that ideal, that I want to become the most loving, compassionate, kind, wise, connected person I could possibly be. And so that's my goal, and I'll get as far as I can towards it,
Well, that's like the bodhisattva ideal.
Yeah.
The bodhisattva ideal, the wish for enlightenment for all beings. My goal as a bodhisattva, if you've taken the bodhisattva vows, I'll bring all people to enlightenment, all beings to enlightenment. And everybody always says, well, that's it. Come on. Yeah, you're not going to do that. And then there's sort of a little internal Buddhist joke about that of course is impossible. From our perspective at this point in time, it is impossible. And then when you study the Prajnaparamita sutras, especially the Diamond Sutra, it says when you bring all beings to enlightenment, and once you get there, you find out that there are no beings. Well, the concept here is that your mind has been purified to the point that you don't see them as separate beings. And so therefore you have just brought all beings to enlightenment. So but ideals are important. And I like the Dalai Lama's attitude there, because you do need to strive for something. It's so easy to be a cynic and not a skeptic, especially in today's world. I think it's absolutely, I give anybody a lot of credit to stay not cynical in the way things are going right now. But there is also the reason to practice more or to start on a path of an ideal. But I love what you just said there. And I had something I was going to say.
I apologize. I interrupted your
I know, and I'm trying to remember what it was, and I'm lost here. I can't remember. But so we'll go on. Do you think there are any other paths other than Buddhism that can bring? Okay, I guess the lead on this is Robert Wright, right? When he says is that Buddhism is true.
Well, okay, so I want to let me answer that question in a couple different ways. So a quote I recently heard in an interview I gave to Geshe Tenzin Namdak, who's the resident teacher at the Jamyang Center in London, is I was asking him about secular forms of Buddhism, and he said Buddhism isn't meant to make more Buddhists, but to generate happy minds. So I think that's kind of there's also another great quote by Dzongtsar Khyentse Rinpoche, who says, if you still define yourself as a Buddhist, you're not yet a Buddha. So he wrote this book about this, what makes you not a Buddhist. So I just love that. There are very few traditions that kind of negate themselves like that and say, this is just a path. Like if you still think you're a Buddhist, you're definitely not a Buddha. So, and obviously, from the Buddhist perspective, you'd say, the Buddhas manifest themselves as saints and so on. Like it's not the word's not important. Like it's a way of seeing reality and seeing other people. So if you look at the behavior and the activities of certain other people in life, in history, like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. and the founders of Doctors Without Borders and my brother's wife, like all kind of people, who just manifest great qualities and they're not Buddhists. I often say like the most Buddhist people I know aren't Buddhists. A lot of right. Demonstrate those qualities. So I absolutely think, every spiritual tradition, you'll find people who we would probably say from a Buddhist perspective are a bodhisattva, or maybe even an enlightened being, certainly a person who is living a happy, meaningful, effective life. So I think all spiritual traditions offer that. There was that great book, The World's Religions, the famous textbook where when you study religious studies. But in there, it talks about all the best qualities of every religion. It's a really nice book. It's not a kind of popular point of view right now. Even as
Right.
with myself, I actually tend to look at a lot of the drawbacks of religions. There's a lot
Religion.
of negative aspects. But if you really look at the effect, if you look at individual practitioners, or in our current Pope, I think it's a great example of a very compassionate, effective person in the world. Yeah, there's many other paths have the same effect on your mind, I think. But there are differences. There are very specific differences, especially
Exactly.
in the view of reality and God. Of course, there's no God in Buddhism. And the way the view of the interdependent nature of reality and emptiness is very much unique to the Buddhist view. That it doesn't really exist in most other traditions. So the way I understand them.
Yeah, and I'll interrupt here. I like to always interrupt when someone says there's no God in Buddhism,
Yeah,
because it can cause people some great distress, because there's a
sure.
lot of people who believe in God and come to Buddhism and practice Buddhism, and I think that's perfectly fine. And what they're doing is practicing Dharma, and they're really there was never Buddhism to begin with. There's Dharma and the
Yeah.
practice of the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, and if you go back to the original teachings of the Buddha, he never said there was no God. He said he refused to answer the question because it was not expeditious,
I
which
think
is
that's very, I think that's very, very wise answer, actually. And some of the teachers I really, really respect, they like directly equate the experience of God for Christian and for other religions with specific experiences we have in Buddhism. Like they are identical. They're
right,
just
right.
words for the same thing. So yeah, I apologize for that. It's more like
Oh,
yeah,
I'm not jumping on you. I'm
yeah,
thinking of the audience, and I'm thinking of your audience might be a little different than my audience, and my audience is a smattering of people all across, and
yeah,
some are skeptics, some aren't skeptics, and some have had, like I said, spiritual wounds, but they still have a deep sense of wanting to believe something,
yeah, yeah,
and I think you can hang on. One of the first questions I got in teaching a class on Buddhism was that very question: can
yeah.
I be a Buddhist and still believe in God? And I said, well, of course. and
Yeah.
and
And if you're in Vajrayana Buddhism too, the Tibetan type of Buddhism, like it's like believing in gods, the way you look at all these I mean, they're called deities. And
they're called deities,
so,
yeah,
so
right.
you pretty much do believe in various
In
types of like quote gods.
gods, and and also, it's just I think the Buddha was the supreme teacher. He never he answered that question perfectly.
Yeah.
It really wasn't relevant. Now I remember the thing I was going to talk
Oh yeah,
about.
yeah, yeah.
Yay for me remembering anything. It was, we talked about meditation, and
Mhm.
I also talked about, it sounds so easy to be, I'm I'm aware of the pure nature of mind. I'm going to sit and meditate, and then I'm going to be aware of the pure nature of mind. And and of course it does take some work. And one of the things that I worry so much about, and I would like to kind of kick this around with you, is, I know you talk about mindfulness on your podcast. And I know, there was the book Mindfulness, and and I've been worried about this even prior to the book came out of Mindfulness, is that um mindfulness has become uh a tool for the, and I'm not trying to be political here, the capitalist consumer society, um as a development technique to make, their workers more productive, and this and that. And actually there's so many people I run into who think Buddhism, they think that there's this mindfulness thing, and then they think that Buddhism is this mindfulness thing, and all this other stuff, the riches of Buddhism just gone,
Yeah.
because the ubiquitous of of the mindfulness has just dissipated and dissolved anything that I think is real, true, and important about Buddhism. What
Yeah.
thoughts?
Well, we could talk for a very long time about this, and obviously it's puzzled me a little bit because Tibetan Buddhism is very, very precise. So the
Right.
word mindfulness is a very specific thing that kind of fits together with 100 other things,
Right.
and it's not forgetting. So in our tradition, mindfulness, the way it's translated, is not forgetting, and it's the
Right.
ability of your mind to just stay with the object. So
Right.
it's a very important aspect of meditation, but it's not necessarily virtuous on its own, because and this is something really important, is that meditation isn't necessarily going to make you a better person. Like, you have to have a certain motivation with your
Yeah.
meditation. So the example I often use, I like to make things kind of funny, is that if you've ever seen The Empire Strikes Back, which is my favorite Star Wars movie, Darth Vader is meditating throughout that whole movie. Like,
Right.
whenever he's not like killing somebody, he's meditating. And that makes him better at killing people. But the thing is, it's not just fiction, right? The US military, they use meditation for some good things, actually, treating PTSD. They also use, quote, mindfulness to train soldiers so that they will pull the trigger and not be shaking and freaking out about killing another person. They train them with the specific mindfulness practices to kill people. Right. So it's really important to realize that, like, mindfulness on its own, it won't lead you to a virtuous state of mind. Like, it could lead you anywhere because it teaches you how to focus. Of course, there is I think the people who teach mindfulness don't, they mean it to be beneficial. And the Buddha did teach this 4 foundations of mindfulness. It is also a specific practice of meditation that very, very beautiful. So at its best, the mindfulness is becoming aware of everything you do, so that you stop acting automatically. So that's very, very powerful, right? You become aware. You also become in the present. So you're not worrying about the past. You're not planning for the future. So these are the benefits of like a healthy mindfulness. But yeah, I'm been very, very concerned. It's actually a big reason why I started the podcast, was just to put another voice out there about the bigger world of Buddhism and other forms of meditation and analytical meditation, and the importance of your motivation and a vector and a structured way of thinking. That, because to put it more simply, you could say mindfulness could help you focus, your mind, but then you have to decide where to steer it. And then that's the benefit of the analytical meditation, is that once you have some self-awareness and some ability to focus and be in the present, that's great, but it's actually not enough to develop yourself as a human being. Then you have to decide, I want to steer myself towards kindness, love, generosity, wisdom, patience, because you can use mindfulness just as a therapy, which is fine, actually. So people will use it to deal with sleeplessness, or to deal with a lack of focus, or, as you said, to be more focused at work. And, I saw that in myself too, actually, as I was meditating, that sometimes I would use my meditation practice more as a kind of crutch, so that I could deal with a lot of the annoying things and things I didn't like, or even ethical things I disagreed with, to push it down and just like compartmentalize the meditation, then go be focused and work hard, at my job. And I think that is not the point. So I think, yes, meditation does work as a therapy. It'll help, with sleeplessness, with focus, anxiety, and so on, anxiety. Yeah. But it's like 1% of the benefit of meditation, because the point of meditation is to bring out your best qualities and to make your life meaningful and make every moment joyful, which may sound cheesy to some people, but it is possible. I see it in my teachers, and I feel it in myself a lot of the time, very much because of the meditation practice.
Absolutely. And that, and that's what I guess that's what I get at. What I'm getting at when I say that is like yes, the Buddha taught the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and yes, we teach about mindfulness and being concentrated, more concentrated, more focused. But at the same time, is like, if we don't have intention, right? Or a certain attitude that precedes it, and that's why I always, one of my things that I harp on the most is like, following someone or some path that gives you, that provides you with the motivation or the intention or the proper alignment, like you said, steering towards the vector, right? The proper alignment to use all these tools. I mean, there is a ton of tools in the Buddhist toolbox. Some can be used like we talked about well, and some can be used improperly, but the key is intention, right? It's the old thing, if all you have is a hammer, everything's a nail. And if you need to focus on what is it I'm trying to do. There's this this trend within within professional development about, and I forget the fellow's name who wrote the book right now, but what is your why? And it was one of my earliest podcast episodes, because I think it's so important. A lot of people may want to be Buddhist, study Buddhism, but really, you need to really investigate, analyze, which you may not all have the tools to do yet, but what is your why? Why do you want to do it? What is your why? And it's your why. It's having the proper intention and the proper attitude that will guide you in the right direction. And not to sound all wooey zooey supernatural, but from my experience, it's having that will align you with the teachers you need, whether they be your cousin or the person down the street or an actual Buddhist teacher. And I really think that it's happened in my life, and I've taken notice. But you can call it supernatural, or you can call it just, well, gee, if I'm focused so much on this, then I'm seeing it. It's sort of like, well, gee, I just got a new Mazda and I've never seen that kind of Mazda before. But once you get it, then you see a million of those Mazdas on the road, right? It's like, so it could just be that and not supernatural at all. It just could be if my mind's set on that. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in particular in Mahayana Buddhism, the motivation is so critical. And I mean, that's, in one sense, it's like 30 seconds at the beginning of your meditation session is what could transform it from being something neutral or even harmful to something beneficial. Why am I meditating? I'm meditating to bring out my best qualities, to be the best, father, daughter, mother, son, coworker, colleague, brother, sister, to everybody, stranger, to everyone I encounter. Like, with that coloring your mind, then the meditation session, then everything is colored with that motivation. And it's wonderful because this is kind of a shortcut for doing anything. It's nice because in, Buddhist centers and stuff, you'll often begin any meeting. And even if you work in the meeting, you start with 30-second motivation. Like, okay, why are we having this meeting? To benefit other people, to do good with our center. And it's easy to forget that and just to dive into work. And so I found it's a really good cheat for various types of activity in life. Like before, I used to give a lot of talks. Well, I still do sometimes, outside of Buddhism, my regular career. And once I discovered Buddhism, I found it was an easier way to prepare for a talk because there's so much ego involved in like giving a lecture or something like that. And before I would kind of be worried, looking over my notes and thinking about this, but I realized like the problem was that it was about me. I was worried about my reputation, how I would come off. And then once I got into Buddhism, I said, oh, it's so much easier to prepare for the talk, because you just sit, especially as you're waiting to do the talk, you think, oh, may this talk be a benefit to people. That's the whole reason for doing it. I hope this will be of benefit to people. I mean, of course, you still may need to do some other preparation, but especially right before, like the instant before you do it, to think that, and then also it is this antidote to things like anxiety, but to think of that only as an antidote to being anxious on stage is so silly. Like that's like 1/1000th of the benefit. The real benefit is it actually makes what you're doing more beneficial.
And it's like, this is the proof in the pudding of what we know about Buddhist teachings, is that, as like in the Bodhisattva trainings, all cause of suffering is thinking about what I want, and all causes of happiness is thinking about someone else wants. And I've noticed is not that I always do this, and not that I don't have profound major ego moments, but is when I do set my intention, set my attitude, the ego really kind of does go away, sort of, or fades backwards or something, and then everything seems so effortless. I remember the first few podcasts I did, it was very nerve-wracking. I hadn't done it before, and I had all these scripts and blah blah blah, and it was all about my writing, and I remember my brother asking, who's I would call him a rationalist cynic, if you will, but he was always interested in me going into doing some podcasting because he thought it would be a good thing for me. But I remember he said, how in the world are you going to come up with all those subjects? And I said, yeah, I don't know. Let's just see what happens. And it's like, when you set your intention, like and then once I gave my podcast sort of away, kind of like an offering, when I gave my podcast up as an offering, sort of like Tonglen or something, when I gave it as an offering, it never became a sweat, really. It never became like a job to do. And as you now know, when I have a guest on, I don't prepare questions. I just said, let's talk, because I figure if I have a guest, they're going to be able to talk about the same things I'm going to be when we have the right intention. So yeah, I think your point is so well taken about that, is that you can't help but go in the right direction, right? If your intention is that way, pure.
Yeah. And it's outside of Buddhism. Anyone who's effective at anything in life, they set that intent, they're committed, and usually with a positive motivation.
Usually.
Well, most people, they want to do good in the world, right? Like, there's not really, even the people we see doing like evil in the world, most of them think they're doing good. Most of them are super committed, and they think what they're doing is like the best thing in the world for the planet and for civilization. So like, we're all trying. It's just we have different opinions about what it is.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so true that people who we look out at and who cause us anger or fear or whatever in this divisive world of ours, and then if we remember to acknowledge the fact that they really believe that this is a good thing, it does change how you reflect on them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask one more question, because I think we're getting too close to the hour, and I don't want to take any more of your time. But
I love this. This is great.
Great. What do you actually, these are two questions. What do you think is the most important thing we as podcasters, Buddhist podcasters, have to offer? I mean, I know you have your niche, and I have my niche, which isn't too far removed from your niche. Mine's more everyday. Yours is more the skeptical, rational thing. What do you think we have to offer, and what do you think we should be doing more of? And I know I'm putting you on the spot here, because I actually just thought of this morning myself, so I don't know.
Oh, it's a great question. Let me think about it. I think, so what I love about podcasts, I actually didn't, 7 years ago, I didn't say I want to start a podcast. I actually analyzed different ways, like should it be a blog, podcast, course, and so on. But what I love about a podcast is that you're right. Someone's right in your head. I mean, you really have a very, very deep experience with the person's ideas, who you're relating to. So I think and also it's very personal. You have a specific voice and person's voice and personality. So I think, but I've always, because I was an artist, I'm an artist, and I talk a lot. So I always really like this idea of respecting people's time and really offering people a lot. It doesn't necessarily mean a lot of content, but a lot of value that
Right.
really offer people something that's going to be of benefit. I think being like entertaining and interesting is also really important, like
I agree.
using the talents of storytelling and emotion to convey stories. And finding that right. Also, avoiding jargon whenever we can. I
Yeah.
try really hard for that. It's not always possible, and there's benefits to jargon too. They do mean precise things, but I think understanding where your audience is coming from and trying to deliver information using ordinary words, or at the very least explain them in ordinary words, I think is very powerful. But it is a nice medium to deliver even kind of meditative. About half of our episodes are meditations. Like that was really important to me because we learned that you can study and reflect as much as you want, but meditation is the thing that is has the biggest impact on your mind. You actually really don't train your mind very much unless you do some meditation. So maybe that's what I would say, especially for Buddhist podcasters, is just make sure there's an element of meditation. It doesn't necessarily even have to begin with a gong or something like that, but you can pull people into a meditative state. You can go from a discussion into a meditation by the rhythm of your voice and the way that you invite people to think, especially asking people questions like, think for yourself. A time that like this question of am I happier when I'm pursuing my self-interest or when I'm benefiting others? That's an invitation, right? That's not an assertion. That's an invitation. Think for yourself. Like right now, people listening to this podcast, think for yourself right now. Think of one of the most positive kind of selfish experiences you had, of like something coming to you, an experience, winning something, a sensual experience, something you ate, who knows, and think how great that was. And then think of your greatest experience benefiting others when you really helped somebody, and weigh those. Which one seem like it was stronger in some way, that it had a more powerful impact, that it was a deeper, lasting type of happiness than the other. I think that's the thing with meditation. I think the more and more that we can, as Buddhists, the more that we can invite people to questioning for themselves and going through these exercises themselves, the better, rather than any kind of assertions about
what thing. Yeah,
mind.
Yeah, and what you just did was an analytical meditation.
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, exactly.
And I don't do meditations like you do, like specific, okay, this is a meditation podcast episode, but since it's focused on every day, I always position a teaching with an everyday lesson, which is getting somebody to think for themselves. And I think that's really important, because it's so easy to take these concepts, and if we can't put it in a like an everyday thing. And I always use myself as an example, usually a negative example, but I always use myself as an example, and then that helps them kind of situate themselves in, gee, I don't know, how would I respond to that? How did I respond to that?
And the purpose of meditation is to give you these tools when you're in your everyday life encountering people, right? So Thich Nhat Hanh is the ultimate master in that, because his books never really are talking about meditation, and yet they give you these tools that are effectively meditations. Like, so for example, he has in his Pieces Every Step, this beautiful 2-paragraph teaching on understanding. I think it's against blame. It's sort of like about not blaming people, but he's saying when you're facing somebody, do your best to understand them. He says you don't blame the lettuce for wilting. Right. You go and look and see, does it need water, less sun, more sun? And so like that idea, like as you're faced with challenges in life, like as you're faced with like, your wife being angry at you, or your boss, or some other conflict, to try to turn on understanding, and turn off kind of blame or even analysis and debate, but just understanding what's going on for that person, not for me, what's going on for them, what do they need, why are they feeling this, and ask them questions, or just reflect like, oh wow, you're really angry right now, or you're really frustrated, upset. Those are the everyday kind of tips that are even more powerful than something on the cushion, because you can apply it in everyday life. But, typically they say in order to be able to do that, you need to develop certain mental qualities on the cushion. So you have like the mindfulness, the awareness, so you remember to do it in everyday life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And one last question before we go. Do you think we referred to this a couple times, the divisiveness in our world? Do you think that this situation in our world, which it doesn't seem to be abating in any kind of way, and I think the global pandemic only makes it worse. Do you think that is more conducive to practice or less conducive to practice? I have been trying to be and I'm asking this question because I have been trying so hard to be an optimist about all of this, and that our that if people practiced, it really would be better. But I'm not seeing, I'm seeing so much, cynicism and frustration and a giving up and a escapism, compared to what I thought that I saw 20, 30 years ago in the urge to take up a spiritual practice. What are your thoughts about that? Make me feel better.
Yeah. I mean, I would not have any kind of absolute statements on, if you look at, I mean, the thing is that the world might have seemed better to us 20 or 30 years ago. I mean, okay, so you and I are both like white people too, by the way. Like, there's a good point to bring up that point.
Good
but
point. Yeah.
But like the world's actually a lot better for a more diverse group of people now. Like, that's the thing. So much was hidden and buried. Like, the life experience for a Black person in America, it still sucks, but it's better than it was a little bit better than it was 30 years ago. And a lot of it is because it's all out on the surface now, actually. Like, we're seeing a lot more because of cell phones and because of political activism and just the difference in the way we're looking at reality. So like, it looks a lot worse. They actually say this about your Buddhist practice, is that it actually can kind of seem like you're getting worse, but you're not. You're just more aware. So I actually do think overall things actually are getting, and there's certain scientific sources too. I don't even want to, people get mad at, there's so many people are triggering now. Like Steven Pinker wrote this great book called The Better Angels of Our Nature, and there are good reasons to be critical of him for certain of these, biases that he's exhibited himself, but still the scholarship of his book is excellent. And it's about how the world has materially gotten better for people, that there's less violence, there's more understanding, there's more political empowerment, there is a little bit less racism, believe it or not. Again, this is not something to be proud of because it's still like really bad, but a little bit less. So I actually think it's just that things are more, it's nice that they're getting attention, because 30 years ago,
right.
And I hate to say it really graphically, but like Black people were getting shot at the roadside and it was not news.
It was not news. Right.
It didn't even make any headline anywhere. So, I mean, it's sort of a sad progress that now that at least makes news, but it's still happening. But I hope that's on a vector towards happening less and a more enlightened society. So I do think it's a little bit more just awareness. Still, we could use more sources of information that were kind of balanced and talked about people's good qualities and how we can bring out our own best qualities and all the incredible things that happen in the world. Like, somehow our media is biased towards negativity for many good reasons. Like, the media is kind of like a branch of the government that keeps it in check. So it's like constant criticism, and it's really good on a certain level. But we need other sources. And I think each of us has to choose for ourselves. Like, I love the New York Times, I actually read it, but it's quite a negative view on reality for the most part. And, I have to balance out my mind, or I have to change the way I look at those when I read those articles, to add to it that compassion of, as I'm reading about even like a political leader I hate, thinking, oh, they think they're trying to do well, and they may be kind of miserable in their life and so on. And I wish they would be happy. I actually wish they would be happy and relaxed, because they'd probably stop doing all these awful things, to everybody else. Right. So you don't get that in a New York Times article. They don't say like, oh, may Donald Trump have happiness and its causes. They're very, very critical, or Joe Biden, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think that putting that spin, like that spin of, I read this beautiful interview with Richard Gere. That's actually an old interview with him, and he said like that's what really transformed his life when he started to take every person he was faced with face to face and on TV too, and just say, I want you to be happy. I wish you to be happy. Like, how does that change your mind and how you relate to every person? Is after you're looking through a screen or in real life, if you have that motivation, like, I want this person to be happy, even if they're my enemy, even if I didn't vote for them, I want them to be happy. And what is that path towards happiness? It doesn't mean I don't fight, tooth and nail against everything that they are doing that I don't believe in, but still to believe in their fundamental humanity. I do think that is a little bit what we're missing more today than 30 years ago. Like, I do think there was a little more of that belief of everyone's, again, not necessarily, people who are bad bias against them, but on the surface, there was like a politeness that is missing. And it was a little bit fake, again, because of all the different, racial and ethnic and gender groups that weren't benefiting from that politeness. But I think we could use a little bit more politeness, kindness, generosity.
It was a little bit fake, but in like doing the practice in doing Tonglen or which is giving and taking, it's like doing what you say, wishing everybody to be happy, or just meta practices, wishing everybody to be happy, and then Tonglen is taking people's suffering and giving them happiness as an offering. But the thing is even if it was fake, like 30, 40, 50 years ago, or, when I was a kid in the 50s and 60s, the Leave It to Beaver lifestyle, it's like, maybe it was fake, but, if you fake it enough, it becomes kind of real after a while. It's so yeah, I think a little more politeness. And if you do try to see, wish people to be happy, I do think it makes a big difference in my experience. So that was a wonderful way to answer my last question. And do you have something else you'd like to say, Scott?
Oh no, but I think also, to respect the people that are quite vociferous too. Like, I think especially in today's culture, to respect, strong voices and people advocating for change in, seemingly aggressive ways. I think that's also really, really important. This is sort of nice to touch on this topic, because I think it's actually one of the bigger issues in Buddhism is, even looking at biases within Buddhism, which is a little bit has traditionally been more for kind of wealthy people and whiter people traditionally. So that's always, can't get into that as our last topic here. It's too big, but no, that probably with another guest.
Maybe another time, but definitely it is that's a huge topic, and I think it's only scratching the surface even today in that area. It's it's like you can't even go to retreats unless you have thousands of dollars, right? I mean, so that pretty much eliminates the vast majority of the population.
But to end on a really positive note, I think just the benefits of these types of thought patterns and meditation practices, it's just extraordinary. And I think that invitation to people to try them with some skepticism, some combination of skepticism and openness. I think I've heard that said, like, Buddhism is more an invitation than anything else. I think looking into that invitation, as kind of last words in the interview, to look at these ways of thinking and meditating as an invitation for yourself to try out, because you're willing to go see the Avengers or like a movie about a serial killer, right? You're willing to go watch a 2-hour movie about a serial killer.
Right.
So why not spend, 2 hours studying Buddhism or meditating or so on, and treat it as a fiction, treat it just like a movie. Say it's all fake, it's all made up, but it has an effect on your mind. Watching a movie, it affects your mind for the rest of your life. It creates neural pathways and certain beliefs and ways of seeing things. So see how this movie plays out in your mind. Even treat it as a fiction, but treat it seriously and pay attention to it and see the effect it has on your mind afterwards.
That's a wonderful, wonderful way to leave this. And I invite all my listeners who have never heard of Scott Snibbe, like I never heard of Scott Snibbe, and who hadn't run across the podcast A Skeptic's Path to Enlightenment, you now see how he can teach. You now see his way of thinking, which is a wonderful way, and he has really great guests on. And so I invite you all to run to your app right now and hit subscribe. I'm sure you'll like it. And if you don't, talk to him, not to me. So Scott, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. And gee, maybe we can do it again because I do love talking to you. So thanks again.
Oh, this was so much fun. Thank you so much. You're a fantastic person to speak with. I love this.
Thank you, Scott. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Scott. I will post a link to Scott's website where you can listen to his latest episodes, link to his podcast to subscribe via your preferred podcast app, read blog posts, and more. And don't forget that you can join me and others in the private donation-supported Everyday Sangha that meets virtually via Zoom every other week on Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. The Sangha is currently studying and practicing the 37 practices of Bodhisattvas. And please consider supporting the efforts of this podcast and related groups by becoming a community member for $5 a month. If you do, you will have access to blogs, members-only podcasts, an education series, a private Facebook group, and soon we will be launching an Introduction to Buddhism course as another added benefit of the membership community. Look for announcement about that in the coming weeks. To join the membership community or the Everyday Sangha, you can go to my website, www.everyday-buddhism.com, and look for the tab Join Membership Community or Everyday Sangha, and do what it asks you to do related to the community you'd like to join. If you have any questions, you feel free to contact me via the contact tab on my website. But I look forward to having you join us in the membership community or the Everyday Sangha. And until then, that's it for this episode. And until next time, keep finding ways to make yours and everyone's days better.